team like Kyrie and KD, or the Lake Show with King James and AD. Wish I could match him up with the bad boys from the 80s, but no black and white, I need that in HD. HenDawgz.
Yo, what's good, y'all? It's your boy HenDawgz, and we back to it. You know how we do it. So I've done the making the case video on Bill Russell, and I've also done the making the case video on Wilt Chamberlain. So I think it's only right that I do this video. This is a perfect segue to go into after reacting to both of those videos. Before we get into this one though, write in the comments right now who you think is better between Bill Russell and Wilt Chamberlain. I want y'all to write that in the comments now before we actually go into this video on them explaining Bill Russell's case over Wilt. But for me, I think Wilt was the better basketball player, man. I think Bill Russell had the better team, had like the better just organizations during the time. He won 11 championships in 13 years. Like, I can't take that away from him. Like, he was averaging almost 20-something rebounds during this time too, so he was great. But I just think Wilt Chamberlain like this whole other specimen that we probably will never ever get again. And one good thing before we get into this that I heard in the last video, they said that if they switch places, you know, it was a very good chance that Wilt Chamberlain would have did what Bill Russell did if he went to Boston. He would have probably won those 11 championships in 13 years if he was, you know, in that situation, on that team, in that organization with Rare Auerbach and all them. And just like everything was just great for him. And Wilt would have probably did the exact same thing Bill Russell did. But if Bill Russell would have had to go do what Wilt did, there's no way he would have been able to put up those stats and just contributed as much as Wilt did. But let me know what y'all think, man. Let me know in the comments now. Let me know. Make sure y'all subscribe to the channel, by the way. We're trying to get to 10K subscribers, man. Once we get there, I will be giving out an Amazon gift card, man, to one of my loyal subscribers. So let's get there. Let's get there. But we're not about to talk too much. We're about to get into this video. We got an 18-minute video, so it's pretty long. So go ahead and grab some coffee, some water, your favorite snack, whatever you need to get through this video, because it's gonna be a good one, but it's not gonna be like, you know, a 5-6 minute video. So let's get into it, man. We got Russell's statistical case over Wilt, Greatest Peaks episode 1. Let's get it.
LeBron James is the greatest player ever. I don't ever want to hear anybody tell me that he is number one.
Michael Jordan is number 2.
He just can't stand.
Let me know what y'all think about that right there. I know that has nothing to do with Wilt Chamberlain or Bill Russell, but I think that was Shannon Sharp saying that LeBron is the greatest of all time and Michael Jordan is number 2. So let me know what y'all think about that, man.
The greatest of all time, the GOAT debate. It dominates the conversation today.
It's my GOAT.
The original GOAT debate captivated basketball back in the 1960s. Back then, the hoops world was divided into two camps. One side argued for Wilt Chamberlain, based on his outlying statistical achievements, and the other for Bill Russell, who collected an astounding 11 championship rings. But what if that whole paradigm is backwards? What if we threw Russell's rings out the window, used Wilt's stats against him, and made the statistical case for Russell over Chamberlain?
You are watching what greatness.
Oh my God, Bron.
Where's Larry Bird in all this? Has a block violation on.
Bird gang, where y'all at?
This series tackled one question: who was the best at his best? We start at the NBA merger and go through the best multi-year stretches, examining the legends who provided the most on-court impact. These are the greatest peaks.
The greatest peaks, okay. Episode 1. We're going to get into all these episodes too, so
before we dive into specific years and criteria, we'll do that at the end of this episode, Wilt and Russell illustrate something at the heart of this series and basketball itself. In 1962, Chamberlain famously averaged 50 points and 25 rebounds per game while playing every minute of every game.
Okay, so this is a kind of side point. That has not really got nothing to do with comparing them, but Do y'all actually believe all of the stats and milestones that Wilt Chamberlain, they say that Wilt Chamberlain achieved back then? Because he got a lot of crazy stuff that, you know, that seems impossible to get, but there's no film behind it. I don't know if I'm just like some hard-headed, you know, young guy that, you know, just don't want to believe it, but I just feel like it's kind of tough to just like someone to just tell me like, hey, this guy averaged 60 and 30, but we don't have any film to show that. So what do y'all think? Do y'all think it was really true? You know, he really was, you know, averaging all of these crazy points. I mean, they definitely got some highlights. You know, you can see how dominant he was. I'm not debating that he wasn't dominant at all, because he was. I personally think he's better than Bill Russell. But I don't know how accurate, you know, these stats is. Like, it was 50, 60 years ago. Like, I don't know how accurate that can really be. But let me know. Let me know what y'all think, man.
Many consider it to be the most dominant season in NBA history. I don't think it's one of the 100 best seasons. That may sound crazy, but those 50 points came with a lot of caveats. For one, there were way more scoring chances back in 1962. Teams ran up and down to the tune of about 130 possessions per game.
That's crazy.
That's about 30 more chances to rack up stats than in a typical game today. More shots, more free throws, rebounds, and so on. We examined this stat inflation last year, but the takeaway here is that 50 points per game then isn't what we think of as 50 points per game in the three-point era.
So in the 60s, the game was super fast. The pace was fast. So this time right here, around this time, or a little bit before, it got slower, and now the game is picked up again. So it's kind of been like this little like up and down thing with the pace. I always thought, I was under the impression that it just kind of been getting faster and faster over time. But they say no, the fastest it's ever been was in the 60s. And then it slowed down in the 80s and 90s, and now in the 20s it's been sped back up. Like, that's kind of crazy to think about.
Maybe the easiest way to see this is to note that Wilt scored about 40% of his team's points that season while he was on the court, whereas Michael Jordan and Kobe Bryant scored about 43% of their team's points when on the court during their mega scoring seasons. Wilt also played the entire game, which gave him a few extra minutes of impact, but also made his rate of scoring less impressive. The Dipper scored about 29 points every 75 possessions he played that year, which would rank 7th this season, so a huge number, but not an historical outlier.
But it's talent to be on the court.
So what, you might say?
It's still talent to be on, have to be able to be on the court for the entire game. Like, you gotta appreciate that as well. Like, you can't just say like, yeah, the reason why he was scoring because he was on the court for so long, which that could be true, but he also has to be in shape. There's more chance for him to miss shots. There's more chance for him to play bad. But it's like, no, he was in shape. He did his thing while on the court. Like, so, of course, if you're going to keep producing at a high level, of course he's going to stay on the court because he do great things while on the court.
Even with stat inflation, Wilt still crushed Russell as a scorer, right? And he did. Russell's scoring rate was actually below league average for most of his career. But the question here isn't who scored more points per game. It's how much did these players help their teams score more efficiently.
Okay.
Playmaking is the other enormous driver of offensive impact, making life easier for all four of your teammates, not just yourself. And Wilt Chamberlain was the original black hole. It wasn't that he couldn't pass or that he never set up his running mates, it's that he very rarely set them up relative to how much he shot. If we look at true shot attempts, that is, when a player took a field goal or attempted 2 free throws, and compare those scoring attempts to assists, we can see just how little Wilt was playmaking. Here are all the non-Chamberlain.
Why do we want Wilt Chamberlain to be out there playmaking, though? He's a 7-foot center that's bigger, more athletic, faster than everybody. Why do we want him out there playmaking and passing the ball? I don't want him out there passing. I want him to be scoring 100 points in a game. That's not his fault that he's just that much better than everybody
else. The shot
else.
Clock with at least 20 true shot attempts per 75 possessions. Now here's Wilt in the first half of his career. He scored more while passing less than just about anyone ever, and that was a criticism of him at the time. It was common to hear refrains like this from Sports Illustrated in 1966. But the tactical demands of using Wilt to his best advantage that's scoring by the way, severely diminish his team's own versatility and generally create morale problems among those who want the ball as much as he does. Now let's go back to that graph and add his 50-point season. It is an outlier among outliers. This has been hiding in plain sight for 60 years. And the names of those who have even gone over 15-1 should drive home just how one-dimensional his offense was. The only players to cross that threshold in the last decade were Brook Lopez in Brooklyn and Kristaps Porzingis in 2018.
Oh yeah, he won't look.
The takeaway here is that Wilt's sexy scoring numbers were mostly one-dimensional, and there's only so much you can help your team without making life easier for teammates. Because of that NBA axiom, Chamberlain's team's offenses weren't very good during those volume scoring seasons. They were most efficient in 1962, scoring about 2 points more per 100 than league average, but every other season they were around average, with Chamberlain registering huge numbers. In 1965, his team had the worst offense in the league by a mile before he was traded, and Wilt averaged 39 points per game on solid efficiency that year.
So, I mean, let me know in the comments right now, like, is that his fault that his team was the worst offensive team in the league, but he averaged 40? Is that, him just being selfish and not being a team player and just worrying about himself, just getting his buckets? Or was his team just that trash and he was the only good player on the team that was able to score? Like, that's two different things. Like, I'm not expecting him to be out there passing and, boosting up his team's, efficiency if they're not that good. Like, I don't know. So let me know in the comments, which one was it? Could he have made his team better, or was he just doing as best as he can? And he shouldn't be faulted for that if that was the case.
This pattern has actually held throughout NBA history. Huge volume scoring doesn't guarantee a good offense. It can help lift teams to competitive levels, raising their floor, if you will, but there are endless combinations of talent that can make an NBA offense slightly below average, besides dumping it into an isolation score 40% of the time. In 1965, Wilt was traded to the Philadelphia 76ers for their 5th and 8th man, and Philadelphia improved from around 500 play to about a 48-win pace. We don't know how much of this improvement was a much-needed defensive boost, but again, big scoring alone didn't create a good offense. Wilt's team offenses actually improved when he finally shot less. Way less, actually. Few players in NBA history have downshifted so severely as a scorer, going from a shooting machine to leading the NBA in assists. In his second full season with the 76ers, Wilt's scoring rate dropped almost down to Russell levels, and his team's offense exploded. There's an enormous negative correlation between Chamberlain's scoring rates and his team's offensive success. The less he shot, the better they did. That doesn't mean his volume shooting hurt his team.
So the stats is showing. The stats shows that the less he scores, the better his team is. So, hey, I can't argue with that. I can't argue with the stats, man. So I feel it. Hey, if Wilt had to, give some of his low, I don't know if he ended up getting better players. That a lot goes into that. I don't know if he had the same team, he just started trusting his teammates more, or if he got some better players. But let me know. Is that what happened? Did he just start trusting his teammates better, or did he get some better players to help him to where he like, okay, I don't have to shoot as much now? Let me know. And it's something I've been noticing too. A lot of people kind of compare him to LeBron in a way. They say like both of them only cared about their stats, only padding their stats. That was their main goal. They didn't care about winning. They just wanted to just pad their stats so that the stats look good so that they can blame their teammates. So let me know what y'all think about that. Is that true? Or is that kind of, they're just kind of just fishing? Kind of just looking for ways to downplay LeBron and Wilt Chamberlain. But let me know.
But it does suggest that it was holding back his better teammates. Otherwise, why did his coach completely change his style with better players around him? Russell, on the other hand, was never seen as an offensive force, but instead is the benefactor of great teammates, Cousy and Heinsohn at first, then Sam Jones and John Havlicek. But there's an enormous problem with that idea. If there's one thing that hasn't changed in the NBA over the years, it's that most all-star players are recognized for their offense. This includes those Celtics around Bill Russell, and it's often said that his bandmates made Boston a dynasty. But the Celtics weren't actually overflowing with all-star talent then. Here are the all-star appearances by team during Boston's perfect run from 1959 to 1966, excluding Russell and Wilt. Does any club jump out as being completely stacked with all-stars if Wilt or Russell were to join them? If anything, the Lakers, behind Jerry West and Elgin Baylor, two of the 5 best players of the period themselves, look like the most top-heavy team. If we add Russell to the Celtics, they end up with the most all-stars, but Wilt's teams weren't lagging far behind. So a bunch of franchises had 2 or 3 all-star players, typically based on offensive play, and since Russell's supporting cast was no different, it should come as no surprise that Boston's offense was around average, or even below average for most of the 1960s. Instead, those Celtics teams won with defense. During Russell's time in Boston, he spearheaded the greatest defensive dynasty the league has ever seen, strangling opponents night after night with a timeless combination of size, speed, mobility, and awareness.
So they said that Boston they focused on defense. Defense was the way that they won their championships. They didn't care about scoring a whole bunch of points. They just if we defend and make it tough for these teams to score, the offense is going to be there, and because of that, we'll be one of the best teams. So my question to y'all is, when Wilt went against Bill Russell, who was getting the fair end of it? Like, I know Bill Russell probably wasn't out there, scoring 30, 40 points, but how was that matchup on defense when he was, matched up with Wilt Chamberlain? Was Wilt still, getting his 50 and 25 that he averaged, or, was this historically, great defensive team kind of shutting him down a little bit? Was he had him in the 20s, the 15s? Like, how was that matchup as far as Wilt Chamberlain being on offense and then Bill Russell being on defense? Let me know.
Boston ultimately incorporated solid defensive teammates to platoon around Big Bill, but he was the driving force behind a club that allowed the fewest points per possession in the league in 11 of his 13 seasons. And while most of the NBA was struggling to reach 50 wins at the time due to parity, Russell's Celtics were an outlier, cranking out 60-win seasons. These circles represent every team's defensive efficiency relative to the league since 1955. The year before Russell arrived, Boston had the worst defense in the league statistically, giving up an estimated 3 points more than league average. With Russell, they jumped to the top of the league and would steadily improve as 1950s names faded and were replaced by stronger and more athletic defenders in 1961. At their peak in 1964, Boston was nearly 10 points better per 100 than other teams on that end, arguably the greatest defensive season ever. As Russell aged and the NBA expanded, Boston remained competitive with its defense until he retired at 35 and then immediately fell back to the pack. All told, Russell captained 5 of the 25 best defensive seasons in league history in a row, an unrivaled team accomplishment. Without a three-point line and primitive spacing that allowed big men to patrol the paint as a backstop, a versatile vertical defender like Russell became the game's most valuable weapon. Boston's ascension to record-setting defense coincided with Russell playing more minutes with a platoon of players around him. At their apex, no other Celtic logged more than 33 minutes per night, and Boston's final resurgence in 1969 came with Russell re-upping his minutes alongside Boston's best offensive player at the time, John Havlicek. Many people talk about Wilt.
John Havlicek, that name sounds super familiar. Can y'all kind of give me his coaching background? Like, why do I know who that is? I know that he played with Bill Russell. I heard that, but why do I hear that name? Was he a coach for like the Utah Jazz or something? Like where? How do I know him, man?
Dominating Russell heads up because he scored more than Bill. In their 142 meetings on record, Chamberlain averaged over 28 points per game on 51% true shooting, compared to just 14 points per game on 42% true shooting for Russ. But Russell's primary value didn't come from his scoring. He won 5 MVPs because he made scoring harder for the opposition, and Chamberlain was no exception. Against everyone else, Wilt averaged 34 points per game on 54% true shooting. So Russell gave him a major haircut, denting his scoring and efficiency. You might think, sure, but Wilt's numbers are still great. But remember, his scoring didn't make his team's offense very potent in the first place. So Russell was blunting what was only a moderately sharp weapon to begin with, imparting that massive defensive impact that drove Boston to title after title every spring. And when Chamberlain was going hog wild trying to score in 1962, Russell gave him a larger haircut. In these 75 games, Wilt didn't face Bill. He averaged 51 points per night on 54% true shooting. Against Russell, he averaged 37 points per game on 50% true shooting. That would rank 11th this year in permanent scoring, similar to Paul George in volume and efficiency. If there were stats like opponent field goal percentage in the paint, or how much did you hold players below their average, pundits might have viewed Russell's performances against Wilt as being dominant. But those stats didn't exist, so Russell's continued success forced people then to search for explanations beyond scoring. Some people like to credit his intangibles as a leader, and others are more dismissive, looking to his teammates as the reason for their success. We don't have precise measuring tools for that period, but if we look at the 28 games Russell missed between 1958 and 1969, the Celtics played at a 35-win pace without him and a 59-win pace when he played.
Wow.
That's super duper impact, especially compared to the changes we saw when Wilt shifted teams, but remember, these are crude measuring tools. Another more comprehensive approach is to also account for teammates who have gone in and out of the lineup over the years by looking at how his teammates impacted teams when they were in and out of the lineup, and so on and so forth. We did something just like this in part 5 of the Thinking Basketball Stats series. And when we solve this giant equation to estimate a player's overall value, looking at just the final score and who played in the game, Russell comes out ahead of Wilt. This is a noisy calculation. It's possible that in reality, these players could be worth a few points more or a few points less per game than these studies conclude. But consider how amazing this is. The only thing this metric uses is who played and what the score was. And yet, its top 25 players claimed 3/4 of the available MVPs and averaged 13 All-Star appearances per player. And again, it says that when we ignore the box score and focus on the relationship between the scoreboard and the player, that Bill Russell is actually better than Wilt Chamberlain.
What?
That's incredible to me, even if it's not a definitive proof, and all of this has significant ramifications for the idea of number one options. We typically think about them as the best offensive player on a team, but a great defender like Russell can be the best player on his team by far without being the best or even second best offensive player. This was often the norm before the ABA-NBA merger in 1977, and while it's rare today because rule changes have helped elite offensive players while chipping away at elite defensive impact, Tim Duncan's Spurs, Kevin Garnett's Celtics, and arguably Ben Wallace's Pistons are examples of recent teams where the best overall player wasn't head and shoulders the best offensive player. If we return to those impact studies that looked at who played and what the score was, we see something fascinating. Among the top 20 players, a handful are primarily playmakers, a handful are primarily scorers, who are also plentiful playmakers, and another handful are defensive titans. What's so telling to me is that this metric isn't influenced by any of our ideas of scoring.
I would have put LeBron with the playmakers, but let me know if I'm wrong. I wouldn't put him in that category with Kobe and Michael Jordan as scoring, even though he's probably going to end up being the number one scorer of all time, which is crazy that I'm not putting him in that category. But give me LeBron as more of a playmaker than a shot creator or whatever. What did they call him? Creating scores. Like, yeah, I put more or less Paul Pierce over there. But yeah, I got LeBron in the playmakers. But let me know.
Another handful are defensive titans. What's so telling to me is that This metric isn't influenced by any of our ideas of scoring, first and second options, or even defense, and yet it's littered with at least 4 completely different types of players. If we use modern play-by-play data to generate a more stable look at this kind of scoreboard-only impact, again, we'd see the exact same results hold. It's a player's overall impact that matters in basketball, and that comes in so many different combinations. In many ways, Wilt and Russell are the original example of this philosophical loggerheads, with Chamberlain bringing offensive and defensive impact, and Russell trying to outpace him, mostly with his giant defensive value. Isolation scoring, like Chamberlain's, can be impressive to watch, and helpful for teams starved of scoring threats, but it can also prevent other offensive talents from flourishing in the absence of playmaking. That means I'll be working off the following criteria for this series. First, this series is about basketball impact on the court. We'll contextualize circumstances and philosophies, but factors like aesthetic appeal are outside of the scope here.
Okay.
Second, I care about someone's overall impact, specifically how much they can help a team win championships. That means skills that scale up to better teams tend to matter more than skills that can't mesh with other top-flight players. Third, we're starting in 1977 when the leagues merged. While the game continues to evolve, the size of the league and its competitiveness are similar since the merger, making for fairer comparisons, which will be made relative to the league in a given year. There are no time machines here. Instead, we're trying to understand how much a player impacted the game, given the rules and practices of that time. And finally, those peaks must contain multiple consecutive seasons. The key reason for this approach is to avoid fluky, single-season outcomes and to increase the breadth of information.
I like that. Like you in order to be in this, greatest peaks criteria, you have to have at least 2 great seasons. So my question to y'all is, who would be excluded from this now? Who is one of them players that had a super, super great season? Just one. Even if it was, anywhere from the 60s, 70s to even today. Who was that player that's going to be like, yeah, he had that fluky season where if he would have had, 2 or 3 of these, he was on pace to be a Hall of Famer or a superstar or something. But all he had was that one great season. Let me know in the comments.
To evaluate a player. At the end of this series, we'll revisit how all these guys stack up, but otherwise the episodes will flow roughly in chronological order, profiling the greatest peaks in NBA history. If you're interested in isolation scoring in greater detail, and specifically Wilt's, it's a main theme in Thinking Basketball the book, and chronicled in the Back Picks Top 40 series. Russell and Chamberlain.
I think that's it for this video, man. I appreciate all of y'all watching it, especially the ones that's still watching right now, because people on YouTube, attention span is terrible. So if you're watching right now, let me know in the comments that you're still watching, because I really appreciate you, man. You might be one of the people I end up giving a gift card to once I hit 10,000 subscribers. So if you're watching right now, let me know in the comments that your attention span is not like most people that watch YouTube. But this is a great video, man. I think at the end of the day, I'm still taking Wilt over Bill Russell, but I don't know, man. This might change. The more videos that I watch of both of these, it might end up changing my mind. I don't know, but as of right now, I'll take Wilt. But a question I want to ask y'all before we bounce out of here, I already asked in the beginning, I want to ask right now. If you have the number 1 pick and you have to choose between Bill Russell or Wilt Chamberlain, who are you choosing? But I appreciate y'all like always, man. Make sure y'all subscribe right now. Make sure y'all like this video if y'all like this video. And go ahead and write something in the comments. I'll be reacting to all of these greatest peaks. But also just write in the comments what other videos y'all want me to react to. But appreciate y'all like always. We out.